What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and now that movie theaters are back, I am here to quote unquote celebrate by letting you know that Black Widow is no perfect movie. And as we all know, Black Widow takes place in between Civil War and Infinity War and follows Natasha Romanoff, played by Scarlett Johansson, reluctantly teaming up with her quote unquote foster family of other Russian operatives. Her younger sister, Yelena, played by Florence Pugh, her father, Alexei, the famed Red Guardian of Russia, played by David Harbour, and her mother, Melina, played by Rachel Weisz, as they decide to go after their former Russian handler, played by Winstone, who has found a way to brainwash the other Black Widow operatives who are scattered all over the world, and has also sent an assassin known as Taskmaster to eliminate them. Now, like every Marvel fan who saw Winter Soldier and saw how awesome Johansson was in Winter Soldier, I couldn't believe that it took this fucking long for her to get her own solo movie. And to this day, I don't think even Kevin Feige understands why this fucking took forever. Like many people, some have wondered if this had to do with Captain Marvel reestablishing the next phase for the MCU. There were some other factors. And needless to say, I think we were all confused and concerned when we found out this movie was going to happen after Natasha Romanoff died in Endgame. And judging by the way this movie wraps up without spoiling anything, this is definitely supposed to be a send-off for Johansson in the performance. But unfortunately, Black Widow not only doesn't really feel like a send-off for her in the character, but this has to be one of the most underwhelming Marvel movies I've ever seen. Not the worst by any means, because at the end of the day, this is still a competent enough film, but based on the amount of expectations we had for a solo movie about one of the most tragic characters in the franchise, because her backstory has so many complex and heart-wrenching elements that could be expanded into a great film, the overall execution in regards to the direction, the script, and a couple of the performances was just mediocre at best. Now, that's not to say there weren't any good things about it. Like many people have pointed out, Florence Pugh easily gives the best performance in the entire film, and she's definitely the most fleshed out character, too. Out of all the family members that Natasha has to cooperate with on this mission, she has to spend the most amount of time with Yelena. And the problem is, Yelena has been living under her shadow as a sister the entire time and carries a lot of resentment over the fact that Nat got out of Russia alive and became an Avenger, so she didn't have to face any blowback from Russia or from any of the people who consider her a hero, despite the fact that they don't know any of the dirty deeds that she's done in her past life. So she carries this preconceived notion that Natasha is a superhero invincible of any wrongdoing, but once she sees the amount of hits that she goes through over the course of this journey, there's even this one great scene where they meet for the first time in over 20 years, and as Natasha's taking off her shirt that's been ripped, Yelena sees the amount of bruises on her back that makes her pause mid-sentence, and as they start to bond over the things that have happened in between the time that they've been separated, she has to question a lot of the memories she had as a kid and starts to question the relationships she thought she had, not just with Natasha, but with the rest of her family as well. And it was such a great thing to see on screen. And even though she's not in it enough to make that much of an emotional impact, Rachel Weisz was good as Melina. I like that the few scenes that she has highlights the amount of regret her character has, not just for the way she treated her own daughters, but the fact that she could have made things a lot different had she spoken up or acted out against her former employers. And the best scene between her and Johansson is when Johansson admits that even though she still carries a lot of resentment towards her as a mother for not speaking up, she does admit that there are some genuinely heartwarming and appropriate lessons that she learned that helped motivate her to never give in to her past pain and to never give up as a human being. And those parts were easily the best. And I appreciate the fact that the overall themes of the movie center around this broken family who seem to be the most oddball characters you could put together, even more oddball than Guardians of the Galaxy, weirdly enough, because they seemingly have nothing in common, but there is one key characteristic that they all share. They all share a deep amount of regret for their past mistakes and their past sins, and the only reason that they've never confronted it head on was because they didn't have each other to either confront over the fact that they've done nothing about it or to confide or to confess in, so that hopefully they can hear some heartwarming and important advice that could help further them as human beings. And I think if that was executed as well as it could have been, this team dynamic would have stood out the most, and the characters would have been the most unique out of any team in the entire franchise. But the problem is it didn't have enough time to be fleshed out. This movie has anything but time to flesh out the characters or the story. The cardinal sin that everyone has pointed out about Black Widow, and is absolutely true, was that it was released at the fucking wrong time. And because all the movies featuring Black Widow in the past, only one of them offered the slightest glimpse into her backstory, this movie only has 2 hours at best to not only connect her dots, but connect the dots of every other character she's come across in the past. So the conversations and the arguments between the family members are not conversations. They're exposition monologues about all the shitty stuff that's happened to them in the 20 years when they've been apart. And I know that there are some people who are going to look at that and say, well, what's wrong with that? This type of family would try and do that to one-up each other over whose life has sucked the most and what would have happened had they had stuck together as a family. And that part is definitely true, but here's the thing. This is a movie, not a play. As opposed to hearing characters monologue over and over and give some of the most expository and spoon-fed dialogue that I've heard in any Marvel movie, in any comic book movie in a long time, that treats the audience like they're fucking idiots. Like, there's one point where Yelena looks at Natasha and goes, "Have you tried looking for your mother? You know, your real mother?" And I just went, yeah, thanks for the clarification. As if we seriously didn't need that already. And there are so many moments where they shove in lines like that. There's one, the very first fight between Black Widow and Taskmaster, where she thinks that the government has sent him to capture her. And then she realizes Taskmaster is looking for some MacGuffin that she has. She goes, "Wait, you're not looking for me, are you?" And I just sat there and went, who wrote this? Seriously, I'm not saying Marvel movies were subtle to begin with, but they treated the audience with more respect than this. Hell, I remember Captain Marvel treating the audience with more respect, and that was preachy as hell. It was more enjoyable than I thought some people made it out to be, but it was still as force-fed as you can get. But as opposed to monologuing over and over again about the things that we don't know, how about showing instead of telling? How about seeing and experiencing the traumatic events of being a spy, such as being told to mercilessly take down anyone who stands in their way, including your own comrades, being split up from your family, being kidnapped in order to be human trafficked and basically be enslaved as an assassin? Wouldn't it be more impressive to focus on those moments as they are happening? And I know some people are going to say, well, you don't have time for that in a 2-hour movie, and if this were a miniseries in the vein of The Winter Soldier or Loki, it would get repetitive because of how long it is. Here's a simple solution. Why not do a 2-part Black Widow movie? In the vein of Kill Bill or something like that, where the first half of it was Natasha and Yelena's childhood, where they are being bred as assassins and they're looking for the more human side that they get to experience in the first 20 minutes, and then the second half being the rest of the overall story, where they have to hunt for the Red Room, where all these assassins are being trained and brainwashed. It's not like Marvel hasn't tried a 2-part movie in the past. Granted, they did keep that a secret until midway, but I felt like you could have done that exact same technique and it would have made a hell of a lot more sense. This is a movie featuring a character who has deserved her own solo movie for the longest time, and giving her a longer send-up than the rest of the cast members, except for Hawkeye, who have had it better than her. Wouldn't that be a much better idea? I mean, and speaking of which, the first 20 minutes, best part of the movie without question. That was what got me hooked, because it felt so different from the rest of the film. It felt so different from every other Marvel movie because it took its time with the pacing in order to build up the atmosphere, to set up the characters and their dilemmas. The dialogue and conversations between the family members felt like an actual family. It didn't feel like movie characters explaining shit over and over again. The dialogue was so much more subtle. There were visually told moments that summed up how skilled Natasha and Yelena were as spies, even though they were fucking children. Seriously, seeing Natasha disarm a Cuban soldier and take his gun, or picking up bullets off the ground when somebody drops them like it's absolutely nothing, those scenes were fucking haunting based on how nonchalant the kids playing them were. And it was what made me think, oh, okay, Marvel was doing their own kind of Homeland or Jason Bourne type of movie, because the direction goes for the gritty handheld look that both of those projects and even the Russo brothers have established as their own cinematic style. The opening credits of Black Widow are straight up a Homeland title sequence where they use jump cuts to intersplice the past and present day sins of these spies, along with these political moments that keep you guessing what actions they've done as spies. There are moments where they're faking family photo albums or home movies in between these training sequences and these acts of complete destruction that were unbelievably intense and dark and brooding, and a complete departure from the rest of the franchise that had me super invested. Except for the song choice that they had. I'm not going to spoil what it was, but it took me out of it once I realized what song it was, and I just went, what does this have to do with what I'm watching on screen? It felt like such a stupid moment. But had the rest of the movie been like that, this would have been one of the most underrated Marvel movies, in my opinion anyways. Now, I could sidestep the fact that the characters and the story are oversimplified to the point where they dumb it down for you and not really by choice. I could have sidestepped all of those things if the action scenes were decent. I mean, after all, Black Widow is one of, if not the most badass Marvel characters, even though she doesn't have any superpowers. But the problem is, either Cate Shortland or the studio itself, I have absolutely no idea who was calling the shots on how to direct this movie, because I've had this problem for a little while, and after watching the trailer for Shang-Chi, I'm extremely worried that Marvel is going for the cheap and easy route in regards to how they portray a movie, where they have those dark, muted colors and the action scenes are all trying to, again, emulate the Russo brothers with how handheld and gritty they are. They have those exact same techniques, but they don't know how to use them properly. There are a decent amount of moments where the action is blurred between shaky cam and quick cut editing, and I say this with every movie I talk about I like that has those techniques. If you film the fight scene in a wide shot long enough to actually show the characters punching and kicking each other so you know what's going on and you know who to be afraid of, and then it'll cut to the close-up at the perfect moment as soon as they get hit in a particular spot so you can feel the emotional weight to it, I'm absolutely fine with those techniques being used. But here's the thing. The fight sequences, the cinematography, poorly filmed, the choreography at best, the locations and the scenarios that the characters are in are so monotonous and repetitive of other stuff we've seen in Captain America movies. We've seen the exact same freeway car chase that leads into or preceded by a freeway fight. We've seen the main assassin fire a bomb at a car that locks up underneath and then flips the car over when it explodes. All of these things have been done before, and they've been done extremely better. And even when they have set pieces that are super imaginative and something that we've never seen before, they don't take full advantage of those opportunities because they want to stick to following the laws of physics as closely as they can with a superhero movie like this. Like the final climax where they're skydiving and there are all these buildings coming down. I was imagining them like jumping from debris to debris as they're punching, kicking, and shooting each other, and that would have been fucking awesome, but they don't do that. And even if they did, it would have been shrouded by all the shaky cam and quick cutting that, one, makes it hard to understand who's hitting who and why, and two, the scenes are so dimly lit that it wouldn't have even made a difference if they were held on a tripod to begin with. And honestly, I was looking forward to Taskmaster as a villain, especially because the powers that he has revolve around being able to mimic other superheroes almost like you're fighting a mirror. There were only one or two moments where the choreography there was actually shocking because he's a surprisingly easy villain to take down in the grand scheme of things. Every time a fight with him happened, I just sat there and went, well, gee, how's Black Widow going to get out of this? And then all of a sudden, it was easy peasy for her, and I just sat there and went, wow, that was remarkably easy to do. Speaking of Black Widow, have I mentioned that she's actually the least interesting character in this entire movie? Seriously, like, at least with her foster family, they're making a first impression, and the positive qualities stick out so much that you can at least remember them, even if you don't find them all that interesting. Black Widow has never been a super complex character, but in moments like Age of Ultron, The First Avenger, Iron Man 2, Winter Soldier, Endgame, she had moments that stuck out. There were moments that made her entertaining and badass in comparison or on an equal basis to the other characters. But in this movie, because she's the most seasoned veteran of the franchise, seeing her as a main character, weirdly enough, has no weight to it because we've seen her in these movies for 10 years do the exact same thing over and over again, and there's just nothing new about it anymore. David Harbour as the Red Guardian was fucking awful. He had more dignity in Hellboy in this, and surprisingly had better comedic material because he's got to be one of the most desperate and lamest comic relief characters that I have ever seen in a superhero movie. Granted, it's not David Harbour's fault that the character is written so poorly, and even though he's this famed Captain America style superhero except in Russia, because why wouldn't Russia rip off something like that American? It just, for one, we never see him do anything heroic as the Red Guardian, so when he's reminiscing about this, about all the great things he's done for his country and how underappreciated he was by his government, we don't feel that way because we never saw those things happen. And he's so obsessed with people remembering his glory days that he sidesteps just about everyone else in his life, and it makes him so unlikable that even when he's telling a decent enough joke, it still doesn't land because he's such a douchebag. And even when he comes to his senses and starts to bring this dramatic heart to the story, every time he makes a speech that has any relevance or any character development, it's sidestepped almost immediately to get a cheap laugh. And it was embarrassing to watch. And there are so many other things I could talk about, like how Ray Winstone is one of the most boring villains in any superhero movie of all time. I could talk about how David Harbour is an idiot, Ray Winstone is a douchebag, and the one other guy in this movie is a plot device with no character depth whatsoever and is just there to make certain plot conveniences because, you know, that'll show guys what it's like, right? I mean, Lord knows there's justice and bitterness. Black Christmas! Excuse me. But needless to say, Black Widow was just such a letdown that I feel like I'm making absolutely no sense. I feel like I'm rambling incoherently, but in any case, I'm glad that I did go back to, that I got the chance to go back to my local theater. It felt like paradise again. If I would have been glad just to see the No Time to Die trailer on the big screen because that looks fucking incredible. And plus, I could actually see what the action scenes were like. So there's that about it. But yeah, for everything that a Black Widow solo movie could have been, here's hoping that Florence Pugh takes the mantle and takes it well. I'm a little worried about her future in the franchise because there is an end credit scene revolving around her, and I hated it. I hated it because it betrays the entire arc that she goes through over the course of this movie about letting go of the sins of the past. And then it invites her to basically forget everything she's learned out of this personal need for revenge against someone who honestly had nothing bad to do, if I'm being completely honest. I've gone on too long about this, and I'm going to wrap it up here as best as I can. I'm going to give Black Widow a 2 out of 5. Guys, thanks as always for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Black Widow. If you liked it, let me know why, because I have seen plenty of people who have enjoyed it for what it was, and I can totally understand why. But in any case, let me know in the comments below. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.